Now, that was just the first question. The first question was, what plot points do we use, right? And now we've got a good way to answer that. Well, is it one of the 6 essential elements we need for a story, right? Can we see how we can get a lot of clarity in going, this is what I need to put in? But the second question was, what is the actual order? So how do I take all of these and put them in the right order to maximize engagement? Yeah, I'm sure you guys have seen stories where they give away the answer too early. Or you've, talked to friends who are bad storytellers and they give away the answer halfway through. And you're like, why are you still talking? Like, I've got this. Like, we're done, right? The structure and the order of it is also incredibly important. And so we're going to dive into how we take those and we structure them in the strongest way possible. And in building this out, you've hopefully seen this shape before, the triangle. This is your ideal story arc. This is something you're going to see in Freytag's Pyramid. This is something you'll see in Joseph Campbell, The Hero's Journey. You'll see it going all the way back to Aristotle, talking about rising and falling action. This is a concept that is across time and many of the greatest thinkers around anything related to storytelling. It all comes back to this same structure of rising action to a crescendo and out. What we want to look at to start is whatever your length is, whether it's 3, 5, 15, 40 minutes, is that we break it down into a very simple beginning, middle, ending. If you want to sound really fancy, you can call it Act 1, Act 2, and Act 3. Okay? That's what the film school kids call it, and you can do that if you want. Same thing, beginning, middle, ending. We want to think of our story that way, and we want to compartmentalize the plot points in that same way as we're building out our story. Here's my beginning, here's my middle, here's my ending. Because each one of these actually has a purpose, and they're very different. So we have to get that. The ratio, the ideal ratio is 25% is the beginning, 50% is the middle, and 25% is the ending. If we have a beginning that is way too long, what happens? They stop watching. If we have a middle that is way too short, the journey is way too short, what happens?
You don't connect emotionally.
I don't feel the ending. If we have an ending that goes on way too long, what happens?
You don't care. You don't move.
You turn it off. You're just like, I'm done. You gave me the answer, right? It's like, think of the Martian, Matt Damon, Mars, his whole journey to get back home. Then he makes it back to Earth. Spoiler alert if you haven't seen it. He makes it back to Earth, and then all of a sudden he meets a woman, and it's about him going on a date, and he's going to start another relationship, and you're like, what? Like, this whole thing was built around the conflict of could he get home? Like, I'm done. I got my answer, right? So you want a short ending as well. Roughly 25, 50, 25. Not exact, 20 to 30% kind of thing, 40 to 60%, but roughly that. You're trying to create that structure and fit your plot points inside of that. The beginning pulls you in, it connects you to the character and creates the conflict, right? It sets up the whole story and gives you a direction. I need to feel Aunt Jane as a character. I need to get that she's been working 50 years and her dream is to go on the football field. I need to get you to get that really quick, right? Or it's Van, her body looks very different to ours. She's got a dream of being a model and the world doesn't think she can. I've got to get you to get that really quick because that's what's going to keep you for the rest of the story, which is the middle and the journey. The goal of this is just to amplify the ending, to make you feel it by having the character go on that journey. And then the ending is your opportunity for action. Share it, whatever you want people to do. What are you leaving them with? So, as we break this down, there are then specific spots that the plot points go. That makes sense? We have 6 plot points. They all have a very specific spot where they go. So this is the order we would want to put them in. And so here's, as you map them out, now the hook and jab are obvious, right? The hook was the opening to the story. The jab was the ending of your story. And I think everybody gets the slides as well. Is that right, Justin? So everybody does get these slides. So the hook is the opening, the jab is the ending. Right after the hook, we have conflict. Character runs into conflict. Then we have the initiation. They take on the conflict. We are going to try and be a model. We are going to try and become a magician. I'm going to try and sell the best houses I can, which brings us into the journey, the plot points in the middle. We come to the resolution, and then we have the jab. It sounds, I don't know if it sounds simple. There's not a lot of elements to it. And that's what I think a lot of people struggle with. This is where they lose the yes end. Okay, I get that. I'll find a couple of them. But let me just add in this other stuff. because I love those drone shots from Africa. They are so nice. And the bride just doesn't stop crying here. It's so amazing. So we'll just throw that in here. What plot point is it? I don't know. I'll just let me put it in there anyways. And that's what happens. We don't have the restraint to go, wait a minute, how do I actually create this strong structure so that people can go on a journey and then take the action? Yes.
Gwen was saying he often struggles with getting clients to use a jab that he considers more interesting and relevant. And so they want a jab that is usually a little bit more matter of fact. It's expected and I find it boring, but they're paying the bills, so I end up doing what they want.
Yeah, I think, the Gwynn's challenge of like, what is the jab, what is the action is definitely a challenge with all of your clients. And when we get to the next section, we'll talk about how we can establish ourselves as the storyteller so that we can actually have more input into that. But always going back to the goal is huge, right? So whatever they are hiring you for a video to do something, right? Whether it's brand awareness, whether it's subscribers, whether it's actually just getting more people admitted to the school. But whatever that is, it's your goal to create a jab that does that, that suggests that action.
And another one?
And James just wanted to confirm, when you're looking at your ratios, how far can you push the beginning? So if it's a 3-minute video, then the beginning needs to be less than a minute, basically?
Yes, is that James Cooper?
It's James Cooper.
James Cooper, woo! Yes, ideally you want to keep it shorter. And the shorter you go, if anything, the beginning becomes less. Or I would say the environment and the context in which your video is viewed is certainly to be considered. If you're on Facebook and YouTube, that beginning cannot be long. Your audience is not looking for you to just waste time and hang out and whatever before you give me a reason to actually watch, right? Now, if I'm in a theater, I can probably stretch you pretty long before you stand up and leave, right? I've got a captive audience. I've got a little bit more room where I can kind of get you, it's a little slow, but then it picks up. So you want to think about the context in which your viewers are watching the film as well.
On that point, when we launched Drain Heart, we launched it with a contest that was about telling stories of people doing good in the world. And so we had, do you remember how many we had?
383.
A lot of films submitted. And so one viral website reached out to us. It's called Upworthy. And they wanted to share a bunch of these films, but they were all 2 minutes.
Yeah.
But that was too long for them, and it took too long to get to the hook. So they took like 50 of them, re-edited them, and they were all going on Facebook and tried to get to the hook literally within the first, I think, 3 seconds. So this is an entire company that's built their businesses off of views, and that goes to show you that it really does matter. The context in which people view your stories should be taken into account when you're creating them.
Yep. And that same company, Upworthy, they are where we got millions of views for one of our videos. And they did the same thing, testing the hook and making sure that people like respond right away. So if you're on social media and you want people to watch and they're not in the first 15 seconds, it doesn't matter. Like it's over, right? So like this stuff really matters that you actually think about those elements. And this structure, we write emails with this. We've written killer emails with this and gotten, Nicholas Kristof, the Pulitzer Prize winning journalist, to tweet our movie. What was the hook? Amina found out that he talks to his kids in German and wrote the hook in German. But just so original that you open 100 emails a day, you're like, wow, somebody really researched and thought about this, right? So just remember, this isn't about necessarily filmmaking. These ideas work in presentations. They work in, writing, all of it. It's still story structure.
What would be the jab of those, the stories that we've watched, like the episodes?
That's a great question. For Zelwyn, he said passion is everything. His whole story, the biggest thing he's ever learned in his life is that passion is everything. You can have all the possessions in the world, but if you don't have passion, you're not alive. And Van was that everybody's beautiful, right? So in these pieces, the jab is an idea. And it's really clear with one of our pilot episode on Dave Jacka, who is a quadriplegic pilot. 96% of his body function he didn't have, right? He only had a small fraction. Spent 9 years modifying an aircraft to fly entirely by himself across Australia with 6% of his body function. Shit's insane. Now you can imagine if I make a video and I open up with a man in a wheelchair saying he's quadriplegic and says, but you know what, Brett? You're only limited by what you think you can do. You're probably going to turn that PSA off pretty darn quick, right? Because we don't want to watch another video with somebody telling us what to do and how to feel, right? But if you watch this 5-minute film and you see his struggle to just put himself to bed And he spent 2 years learning how to do that, modifying wheelchairs, building braces for his wrists, how he went through everything to finally find an instructor who would train him and build the aircraft. And then he gets up in the air and he says, it's like I'm free again. I can move in the air. I'm liberated. And you know what? You're only limited by what you think you can do. It's like, hell yeah, I'm going to go do something way bigger now, right? It's the connection of the idea to the story. That's how it goes deeper, because we don't want to be told. So in that case, they're ideas, and you're trying to share ideas, which a lot of nonprofits do. If they don't want to raise money, it's that they want to say that there should be equality, that women deserve to be educated in, third world countries, stuff like that. But really having that at the right place is how we really feel it. Yes.
So how do you avoid getting too mushy and it becoming a PSA? Is it by
Right here.
having all those elements?
Do
That's
all
how
this.
you avoid the mushiness.
It becomes too mushy when you open up with people saying,
Yes.
this is the state of education in Africa, and this is why it's bad, and this is what you should do, and this is all of that kind of stuff. Versus having a character go on a journey, and it brings us to, here's the problem and what you can do, right? Story is just an experience. It's just a human experience. And we have to realize that facts saying 66 million girls go uneducated is just at the opposite spectrum, the opposite end of the spectrum of a story. 66 million people affected by something is just 66 million stories. So we're zooming in on the story to give you the lived human experience as opposed to the facts. And scientifically, story converts better than facts. Like studies where they would give you, it was Save the Children that did education work, ironically enough. And so they went around campus and they would give you an envelope and they would ask you to donate. One of the envelopes had all the facts about all the kids that needed money to get educated and what that would do. One of them had a picture of one child and their story. Which one got more money?
The facts.
Right? The story did. They did it again, and this time it was 3 envelopes. The facts, the story, and the facts. Which one got the most money? The story. Yeah. So story actually converts to dollars and cents and customers better than facts. And that is one of your biggest tools with clients, because they want to go to the facts and features, right? They want you to put in how many houses we sold and how we're this and this, but it's the actual experience and taking us into a journey that allows us to feel it for ourselves.
And you know what the crazy thing is? Patrick just told you a story. He did. He just told you a story. So you could listen
you're
and
getting
hear.
meta now.
I know, right? No, but when you're asking these questions of, like when your client wants this or when your client wants a certain person in the story, it's things like this and this understanding and bringing them up to speed. It sounds awful, but really bringing them in with a story that's going to connect them to why you're doing what you're doing, why you're making those decisions. And that's going to empower you rather than, yeah, all right, yeah, well, we can do that. We can try and make it work. And then you're stuck for 5 hours trying to figure out how a character fits in a story.
Justin has a question.
James was wondering, since the jab is the moral of the story you want us to remember, does the target guide us how you create? Does that target guide how you create the story?
If the jab is, say, you're only limited by what you think you can do, in the one example, is the entire story created just to get you there? And in a way, yes. In a way, we have a completely different idea on how you're going to define your purpose and objective, and that's going to be the 4th building block. So we're almost there, and we'll talk about how we create that filter that actually determines all the plot points, not just the jab.
Mm-hmm. And that's actually our next point. Like, how do we actually put that together? Well, it makes sense. Yeah.
Sure. Okay, next point. So,
Nice.
yeah, I didn't know if you're, I'm good. We're on the same page now. Yeah. Okay, so how to discover your potential plot points. So now we're back into, great, I get this desire thing, I get this conflict thing, I get that all of that comes into like 6 plot points. If I put them in the right order, then boom, people love it, people watch it, I'm amazing, right? Okay, so we got that. Now how do we actually find the plot points that we can use to create? And one of the biggest things that we want to start with is the distinction between a general and a specific plot point, because they are hugely different in their effect on the viewer. So we're talking about general versus specific plot points. Alex, you are in marketing. So give me an example of what's just a moment that affected your connection. What's a plot point that related to your journey in marketing?
Before I was even in marketing, when I was dog sitting for a friend of a friend, and that friend of a friend and I started talking, and they offered me a marketing internship, and it just happened because I was a funny guy, I guess.
Awesome. So now, what we right now we're in between there in terms of whether that's general or specific. It's kind of specific, and then we got a little bit of the details, right? But it's kind of general that you don't really know. So I'm going to ask you to tell me that story again, but I want you to make it very specific. So we want you to try and think about and fill in the picture as much as you can. Tell us the story of that moment. Where were you? What season was it? What was on the table? What was the conversation? What was your reaction? Just try and, in a minute, bring us into very specifically that moment.
So it was the summer of 2013. I was in the suburbs of Chicago, living in the basement of a townhouse with 5 guys on the soccer team, and needed some money. So I started asking around, like, hey, does anyone know of odd jobs? A guy that I worked with at my campus job said, yeah, I've got a friend, and they have this big Bernese mountain dog. It's like 120 pounds, and it's only 11 months old. You want to watch it? Because I can't do it for him. And so I said, sure, sounds good. So I go over to meet this dog and to meet the dog's family, and we just started talking, and we talked about my campus job as a fundraiser, and we talked about all of the goals that I had for my life, and I sort of mentioned marketing, and I mentioned my interest in the field, and they said, well, hey, like am a partner at this marketing firm downtown here. Why don't you come and intern with us this summer? We can't pay you, but it'll be great experience, and you'll learn a whole lot. And so I went and I did the internship, and by the end of the summer, I'd ended up creating a $600,000 proposal and pitching it to one of their potential clients that
It's a
ended up
solid jab.
signing
Solid
on
jab.
for it.
Round of applause for Alex for. Okay. Do you feel the difference in the second version? Can you picture it? Can you feel it? So what we're trying to do is go from general to specific. General plot points are much more like, I grew up in a bad neighborhood. I grew up in my family, a lot of people weren't educated. I grew up in Africa or Uganda or wherever it might be. But they're general cultural widespread influences, whereas specific is the moment, the neighborhood. We can really get brought into it. And we can see, hopefully, in that example of Alex, the value of the specific over the general. A lot of times when you ask people things, they give you general plot points. Oh, yeah, no, I started this, 5 years ago. But when you really drill down, what was the moment, right? The moment that it started, that's where the stories are, in the lived experiences in the moments. You want to try and drill down into those as opposed to living in, I grew up in a bad neighborhood, then I did this, then I did this. That's more of a fact, isn't it? The more specific we get, the more we have story and human experience. Yes?
Matthew was wondering, many of the projects that he deals with, the client already has an idea of how the production process works. And so when he tries to show them that crafting a powerful story takes researching and finding conflict, desire, plot points, they don't seem to fully get it. They tend to not lend themselves to the process. They don't understand why I want to talk to different people, try to understand their why. How do you set expectations beforehand to help them understand the importance of research and discovery so that you can get to this level of specificity?
Sorry, and who asked that question?
Matthew.
Can we ask Matthew if I can come back to that in the next section? Because what we're going to set up is it going to empower him to do exactly that?
We'll just do that.
Thank you, Matthew. Okay, so as it relates to general and specific plot points, we can see that difference. We can see the effect that would have. And we can see the more we get specific. Even Ethan, earlier on, we did the 5 whys technique. He told us a touching story of why he became a filmmaker, his friend committing suicide, right? There's still a little bit more general. You get into the moment that he got the phone call, the text message, he heard about, his friend and how he felt and the realization of the story he was telling himself. How much more powerful is that? Right? So we have to realize that life is lived in the details. And that's what you want to try and pull out. And in doing so, what you find is that this is enough to make a whole story. You actually don't need a lot of plot points to do a really solid film. Not a lot needs to happen if you really bring people into the details. If you go rewatch any of the episodes of The Remarkable Ones, it's like, it's actually just a couple things happen, but we really bring you into the moments and make sure you feel them. Yes?
Like a couple of these guys asked me how I started in filmmaking, and I was very general, and I realized it afterwards, and I don't know why.
That's a deep question, my friend. I think as it relates to like social desirability, we don't want to impose, right? Like you're asking me a question, I don't want to go into this big long thing, and so I'm going to give you a quick, succinct answer. And so part of that is you needing to set the stage about what you're looking for and how you'd like it, and be interested. Maddie mentioned like having a conversation and being interested, and going, "Wow, like tell me more. Like where were you? What did you feel like? What was the conversation? How did it sound?" Right? And encourage them to kind of go deeper, and then people will. I think it's easier and quicker. And you'd feel rude if somebody asks you a question, you're going to go dive into a 5-minute story about why you got into it. So you can set the parameters. The greatest tension in any relationship is unmet expectations.
Yeah, it is.
So if you
Don't
set
leave me
that
hanging.
expectation too, right? If I say, "Hey, Alex," I mean, notice how I set the expectation of "tell me in a minute," right? Which means he can't go, "Oh, I was in a basement and I had a conversation." So use that kind of those storytelling tools to help get them more specific.